town of Stillwater was a strange place, full of secrets and whispers. Nestled deep in the Appalachian hills, it had a way of swallowing people and their stories. The fog often rolled in thick, and shadows stretched longer than they should. The residents of Stillwater knew to keep their heads down and ignore the odd things that happened around them. On the outskirts of town, hidden in a tangle of overgrown trees, stood WXTR 103.5, an old radio station that was once the heart of Stillwater. It had been known as The Pulse, broadcasting music, news, and local gossip. But as time passed, the world moved on, leaving The Pulse to fade away, forgotten and alone. Richard Holloway had been the last DJ at WXTR for nearly 20 years. While everyone else embraced streaming and podcasts, he clung to the nostalgia of vinyl records and late-night broadcasts. Richard found comfort in the dim studio, where the warm glow of the control board wrapped around him like a favorite blanket. He enjoyed the solitude, the quiet nights, and being a voice in the dark for anyone still listening. But there was one thing that made Richard uneasy: the basement. Underneath the station, behind a heavy door, lay a dark and mysterious space. The older DJs used to joke about it, calling it the dead zone, claiming that strange things happened there. Richard never dared to go down. He made a habit of avoiding it altogether. That all changed one chilly autumn night. It started like any other night. Richard was lost in his broadcast when the phone rang, slicing through the quiet. He glanced at the clock, 1:13 a.m. He hesitated but answered. WXTR, The Pulse. "You're on the air," he said. For a moment, there was only static. Then, a voice broke through, raspy and distorted. "Richard." He froze. Something in that voice sent chills down his spine. It sounded as if whoever was on the line had been waiting to say his name for a long time. "Who is this?" he asked, trying to sound calm. The line went dead. Silence filled the studio, but it felt heavy, almost alive. Richard shook it off, convinced it was just a prank, and returned to his music. But the calls kept coming. Every night at exactly 1:13 a.m., the phone would ring, and the same voice would whisper his name. Each time, the static grew louder, and the voice became clearer, as if it were getting closer. "Richard, come down." It was a command, not a request. Something was calling him to the basement, the very place he had always avoided. The following night, Richard sat in the darkened studio, his heart racing as he watched the clock tick toward 1:13 a.m. He could feel the tension in the air. When the phone rang, he answered it without hesitation. "Hello?" Static filled the line, then the voice returned, more urgent this time. "Richard, it's time." The line went dead again, and the air felt thick and heavy. Richard's heart pounded as he rose from his chair and walked toward the basement door, the door he had never opened. The door was old, with peeling paint and rusted hinges. He hesitated, feeling a deep instinct to turn back, but curiosity pulled him closer. He turned the knob and opened the door. The stairs creaked beneath him as he descended into the darkness. The air was damp and musty, with a faint metallic smell that made his throat dry. Richard flicked on his flashlight, but the beam barely cut through the darkness. All he could hear was his own breathing, echoing in the quiet. At the bottom of the stairs, Richard stood before an enormous, old radio console covered in dust. It looked ancient, with thick dials and heavy levers. But what unsettled him most was the feeling that it was alive, vibrating with a strange energy. A low hum came from the speakers. This static felt different, as if something was trying to break through from the other side. Richard stepped closer to the console, his heart racing, and reached out to touch one of the dials. The moment his fingers brushed the cold metal, the radio burst to life. The static roared loudly, filling the basement. Richard stumbled back, covering his ears as the noise drilled into his skull. Then, through the chaos, a voice emerged, low and menacing. "Richard, why did you come?" The temperature dropped sharply, and Richard's breath became visible. He turned to flee, but his legs felt heavy, as if the air had turned to lead. The static grew louder, drowning out all other sounds, until only the piercing noise filled his mind. Just when he thought he would be overwhelmed, the radio crackled one last time. "You've tuned into the wrong frequency." Then everything went silent. The next morning, WXTR 103.5 was nothing but dead air. No signal, no sound, just silence. Richard Holloway had vanished without a trace. The police found the station locked from the inside, the equipment cold and lifeless. The basement door was shut tight, as if it had never been opened. Weeks turned into months, and WXTR 103.5 became a ghost of the past. The townsfolk shared stories about Richard, warning newcomers about the haunted station. They spoke of strange noises at night, of a chilling presence lurking within. Then one evening, a group of college students, drawn by curiosity and thrill-seeking, decided to explore the abandoned station. Armed with flashlights and cameras, they pried open the door and ventured inside, their laughter echoing off the walls. As they wandered through the dusty rooms, one of the students, Emily, discovered an old vinyl record. "Let's play something," she said, her voice filled with excitement. The others cheered her on, daring her to use the old equipment. With a grin, she set the record on the turntable and lowered the needle. As the music crackled to life, an eerie stillness enveloped the room. The tune played, but something felt off. The air turned heavy with anticipation. Then, suddenly, the music distorted, twisting into a cacophony of sounds. The lights flickered, and shadows danced on the walls as if something had awakened. "Guys, this isn't funny," Emily shouted, a hint of fear creeping into her voice. Just then, the radio crackled again, but this time, it was Richard's voice, clear and haunting. "Help me." The students froze, eyes wide in terror. The voice continued, pleading and desperate, echoing through the room. "Please, don't leave." Panicking, they rushed to the door, but it wouldn't budge. It felt as though the very walls were closing in around them. They could see figures forming in the shadows, ghostly silhouettes that moved closer, reaching out with hollow eyes and open mouths. Emily, one of her friends, screamed, clutching her arm. "What did you do?" "I don't know. I didn't mean to." Just as they thought all hope was lost, Emily noticed something in the corner of the room, a small, forgotten key hanging on the wall, glinting in the fading light. "Over there." "The key," she shouted, pointing. One of the students darted towards it, snatching it from its hook. He rushed back, fumbling with the lock, hands shaking with fear. Come on," they urged him, the figures closing in. With a loud click, the door swung open, and they tumbled out into the fresh air, gasping for breath. They ran without looking back, never stopping until they reached the safety of the streetlights outside. As they caught their breath, they glanced back at the station, where the radio's eerie music still echoed. Then, the front windows flickered, revealing Richard's face for a split second, twisted in anguish, before it faded back into the darkness. From that night on, WXTR 103.5 stood silent, a warning for anyone who dared to enter. The students shared their story, but few believed them. The town remained wary, knowing that sometimes the things we leave behind are better left undisturbed. But every now and then, late at night, when the wind howled through the trees, a faint voice would whisper through the static of 103.5, calling out to anyone who would listen. "Help me." And somewhere deep inside the forgotten airwaves, Richard Holloway lingered, trapped in a world of static and shadows, forever searching for a way to be free.